Welcome back to the 25th online episode of Peacetime, hosted every Sunday morning by Peace Point with myself, Phra Nicholas Thanissaro, live streaming from Dhamma International Meditation Center in Azusa, California. Today's session will be about an hour and 10 minutes long and will consist of a 25-minute talk and 20 minutes of meditation, finishing up with 25 minutes of conclusion and news updates. Last time you saw me, we looked at how to manage daily stress through meditation. The topic for the Dhamma talk today will be patience and obstinacy. And today, because my usual studio is under renovation, there may be a few different backgrounds, camera angles, and post-production imperfections for you and me to test our patience on until we can get back to our usual facilities, assuming they'll take us back again once they're done. Anyway, as per usual, this session I would encourage you to send in any questions you have by emailing me at peacetime.questions@gmail.com so that I can have a shot at answering them next time round. With our study of obstinacy and patience, we come today to the last in a series of sessions I used to call meditation and emotions, or emotional alchemy. Before we move on to other subjects, we should try to put together a perspective of all we've studied over the past few months to conclude how we should best internalize what we have learned. So it is more than mere theory, but something we can actually apply to our journey of spiritual transformation. Since August 27th, or A23, if you've been keeping track of my talks, we've been looking at many aspects of negative emotions, which tend to be things that come from inside of us, comparable to rust in the mind. In fact, over the last 15 talks, we have outlined as many as 16 forms of subtle defilements in the mind that we cling to obstinately, and I will recap them in the order that they appear in the so-called upakilesa in the Vattupama Sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya. The first subtle defilement in session A26, under the heading of Transcending Sensuality and Craving, was greed and materialism, or avijja visamalopa, which was the desire for things without end. People who don't just want things, but they want more and more things without end. As soon as they get something new, they want something else. The second subtle defilement, which we looked at in A29, give forgiveness, get peace, was grudge or spite, also known as payapata, namely when you stay angry overnight. Do you remember back to that one? Where anger becomes a problem because it is long-lived. If you remember, I advised that meditators should stay angry for no longer than it takes to drink a glass of cool water. The third subtle defilement was anger, or kota, which we looked at in session A30, entitled Nipping Anger in the Bud, where we are tempted to harm others or think harmful thoughts about them, or are unable to control ourselves when angry, succumbing to stamping our feet, or tearing out one's hair, or spitting or slamming doors. The fourth subtle defilement was undirected anger, or upanaha, which was also in session A30, Nipping Anger in the Bud. Undirected anger is seen as a little bit less serious than when it's actually directed at people, but when you are angry just because you bite your tongue or stub your toe, then it shows that you have latent anger inside you, even when there's nobody to blame the anger on but yourself. In session A32, Getting in Touch with the Real You and Appreciating Others, we talked about the fifth subtle defilement, which was depreciation of your debt of gratitude to others, or makha. It means jettisoning people who have helped you in the past. It can also cause people to fail to appreciate good things in the world or good things done for them. It can be seen when certain people find fault with others or gloss over favors received in order to make themselves look more influential. The sixth subtle defilement in the same session was one-upmanship, or palasa, pulling yourself up by pushing others down. Also in that session, We looked at the 7th subtle defilement, which was envy or jealousy, otherwise known as Issa, which is basically a mixture of wanting to get things and also hatred for the person who got it instead of you. The 8th subtle defilement was stinginess or meanness, otherwise known as Maccharya, which we looked at in A27 under the heading of 7 myths about generosity. Stinginess was the tendency when you have something, but you don't want to share it with other people. Also in that session, we looked at a 9th subtle defilement known as deceit or maya, where people resort to devious means in order to get things. In session A32, getting in touch with the real you and appreciating others, besides mentioning appreciation, we looked at a 10th subtle defilement called boastfulness or sataya. This is when we have an erroneous perception of how our level of virtue stands in relation to other people. Because of this, we tend to brag about the small amount of good things that we have, instead of focusing on what more we could try to assimilate of the goodness we see in the people around us. This is the origin of the metaphor about the half-full bottle, making a lot more noise when shaken than a full bottle which makes no noise. In a similar way, boastful people tend to be the ones who are half full of abilities, so they tend to have to brag about it in case no one notices. The 11th subtle defilement was obstinacy or stubbornness, otherwise known as tampa, which we are looking at in more detail today, especially in relation to the ultimate form of patience in heeding criticism. The 12th subtle defilement, also connected with the erroneous self-view of A32, was looking down on others or sarampa. In the same session, we heard about the 13th subtle defilement of conceit or mana, where we have an erroneously high opinion of ourselves. A connected 14th subtle defilement was putting others on the same level as yourself, or atimana, even though in terms of virtues they are out of your league. The 15th subtle defilement was drunkenness or mata, which we met up with in the procrastination trap of session A31. It was not the drunkenness of having imbibed too much, but where people lack urgency about doing something valuable with their life. They think they're going to live forever. They think they're going to be healthy forever. It's the sort of drunkenness which was a leading cause of complacency in life. The 16th and last subtle defilement was recklessness or pamata, also in A31, where we called it the mediocrity trap. People who didn't make full use of the advantages they have and are generally full of excuses. Over the last few weeks, we have thus looked at a total of 16 different aspects of subtle defilements within ourselves, along with the antidotes. Today we will go into detail on stubbornness, which is the final one of these subtle defilements where we have not had the chance to go into any detail. Just for a moment, try thinking back to the last time you really wanted something, but you were told no. It could have been a promotion at work and your boss told you someone else was a better fit for the role. Whatever it was, how easily did you give up? Did you just walk away? Now think of some influential people like Steve Jobs, one of the co-founders of Apple. He led the team to develop the first iPhone, which is a project which took roughly 3 years. Steve Jobs was considered to be very stubborn. Albert Einstein remains one of the most famous theoretical physicists. He developed a theory of relativity which helped explain the effect of gravity, and he completely revolutionized the field of science. It took him about 10 years to come up with. Einstein was also considered to be very stubborn. The 19th Amendment granting women the right to vote in the US took more than 70 years to pass. It was championed by Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who pioneered the grassroots women's movement from state to state. Again, they were women who at the time were labeled the most dangerous team in America and also stubborn. These are all people who either paved the way for women's rights or made waves in the field of science and technology. All these are people who envisioned a better world. When we hear their names, we focus on all their achievements, not on the no's they ignored along the way. They all faced their fair share of rejection and adversity. Does the success shown by these supposedly stubborn people mean that you should also emulate them by being immune to any and all advice that challenges your point of view? If not, then what exactly is the difference between being a person who is patient, stubborn and tenacious in overcoming obstacles, and a person who is merely obstinate? It is important to define our terms carefully because I am using the term stubbornness or obstinacy to denote a negative quality today and patience to denote a positive quality. Although stubbornness can be a powerful tool, it might not always carry a very positive connotation. Stubbornness is generally defined as having or showing dogged determination not to change one's attitude or position on something, especially in spite of good arguments or reasons to do so. Here, the reason stubbornness or obstinacy is said to be a negative characteristic assumes that you are wrong, but the advice you are being given is right. So you are missing out on something valuable. What we have seen with the examples of Steve Jobs, Albert Einstein, Susan B. Anthony, or Elizabeth Cady Stanton is that they ignored bad advice from others and carried on to achieve things in their lives that were good and beneficial for themselves and for the world. Therefore, instead of calling their qualities stubbornness, for clarity today, instead I would like to use the term patience, because patience can be defined as maintaining one's normal state of goodness, no matter whether shaken by tempting or unpleasant obstacles. In fact, you could substitute in words like persistent or adamant or steel or tenacity or grit, since we generally view these in a more positive light. But today I'm going to use the term patience for all stubbornness that is a means to a good end. It's a quality we might apply to people we admire. It's a quality which might even show up under preferred qualifications on a job posting online. When you are patient, you don't let opposition faze you. But by contrast, obstinacy or stubbornness is considered a negative trait or is associated with someone who is difficult to work with and lacking in humility. You've all probably heard of the term commonly used as an insult, stubborn as a mule. But where stubbornness is not a dead end but merely a detour on the way to something better, it might be considered to be patience rather than stubbornness. What I don't mean by patience is a patient monk who can't be bothered to repair the hole in his roof, so he puts up with the sensation of water dropping on his head. The term patience would also not be applied to a person who ignores valid criticism of their behavior. So today we are focusing on the subtle defilement of stubbornness or obstinacy. Some people look very physically strong and sure of themselves. They want to not defer to anyone and never show others any respect. Does their high level of self-esteem mean that they have mastered patience and have overcome their defilements? Well, although they may appear strong, they are only strong on the outside. On the inside, they are still weak. Take the following story as an example, which is an alleged conversation between a US naval ship and Canadian authorities off the coast of Newfoundland. This supposedly occurred a number of years ago, and the way it starts is that the Americans pick up a proximity warning on radar and hail the Canadians over the radio. Please divert yourself 15 degrees to the north to avoid a collision. The Canadians radio back saying, we recommend you to divert your course 15 degrees to the south to avoid collision. The Americans are not too pleased to hear the Canadians answering back, so they say, this is the captain of a US naval vessel. I say again, divert your course. The Canadians replied, "I say again, you need to divert your course." The Americans ramped up the rhetoric further, saying even more sternly, "This is the aircraft carrier USS Lincoln, the second largest ship in the US Atlantic Fleet. We are accompanied by 3 destroyers, 3 cruisers, and numerous support vessels. I demand that you change your course 15 degrees north, that's 15 degrees north, or countermeasures will be undertaken to ensure the safety of this vessel." The Canadians replied, "This is a lighthouse. Your call." It is hard for a stubborn person to realize their own weakness. They are generally unable to accept criticism from anybody. Supposing someone comes along and says, "Did anyone ever tell you you're stubborn?" If they can accept the comment at face value, then obviously the comment is not true. If they really are stubborn, they will say something like, "I'm not stubborn. I'm a person who has reasons for what I do." Everyone has the trait of stubbornness to a certain extent. It's just a question of degree. Most domestic disputes originate in stubbornness. The wife accuses the husband of doing something wrong. He thinks he's in the right, so he defends himself. After the husband argues for a while longer, he realizes he was wrong. However, he is not brave enough to admit it. He cannot back down without losing face, so he has to carry on arguing until the whole family suffers. There are 2 major categories of stubborn people: those who are stubborn through ignorance and those who are stubborn because of their opinions. Those who are stubborn through ignorance always want their own way. They will stubbornly carry on doing something no matter how many times you try to stop them. They will think and do exactly the opposite of whatever you request. An example is the sort of child in the following conversation with a parent. "Come over here, son." "I won't come." "Go somewhere else then." "I won't go." "Then what will you do?" "I won't do anything." "Stay where you are then." "I won't stay." For such people, it doesn't matter what you say, all they want is something they can refuse to do. Such people are like cats. Try taking a cat for a walk. They don't behave like a dog. If you push a cat forwards, it will pull back. If you push it backwards, it will pull forwards. If you push its back up, it will pull it down. If you push its back down, it will raise it up. Sometimes such people might not only be ignorant, they may be too lazy to change. If you meet such people, never try to talk them out of doing anything. You have to find another way of changing their mind. In fact, all you need to do is to praise or flatter them, and before long they will comply with your wishes. The second reason people are stubborn is because of their views. In other words, they are opinionated. Such stubborn people are often the most intelligent, but only with a narrow intelligence restricted to their specialism. There may be many more things that they are ignorant about. They don't realize that they do not yet know. They think they are already omniscient. They are unable to accept advice from anyone, so their co-workers tend to leave them to their ignorance, to learn from their own mistakes, in other words. Once they're caught red-handed making a mistake, then you can say, "I told you so," and they might be a little bit less reluctant to listen. In place of advice for opinionated, stubborn people, you can also try giving them hints and anonymous guidelines so they think it is their own idea. The people of old said that advice to a person stubborn by stupidity is like watering a tree stump. In other words, it is a waste of your time. But if you water a tree stump, you might get lucky and at least get a few mushrooms to eat as a result. However, advice to a person stubborn because of opinions is like pouring water on a dog. The dog doesn't get wet, but it will shake itself until everyone around it is wet instead. In other words, you will get your advice thrown back in your face. And just before we come to time for our meditation, it's probably worth pointing out that just because a person appears to be humble and follows your instructions, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have become a master of spiritual humility. There are two cases where compliance may in fact be false humility. The first case is where a person is just gullible by nature. Such people look compliant and obedient, but their humility is not intentional. They are only obedient because they lack any intelligence to think for themselves. They blindly follow the most recent piece of advice they heard. You might advise them to go to school, so they will obediently go to school and listen to the teacher for hours at a time without understanding a word. If someone else tells them to skip school, then they will play hooky with exactly the same amount of enthusiasm. They will do whatever the last person they met told them to do. In fact, they are missing any direction in life because they lack the wisdom to see the need for a purpose. In fact, they lack any confidence in themselves at all. The second sort of false humility is people who are just inert and unresponsive. This is another variation which you might mistake for patience, which is the sort of person who has no response to any sort of stimuli, whether they might be stimuli for the benefit of themselves or stimuli to the detriment. The idea of inner strength is to be able to distinguish between and act preferentially on opportunities to transform yourself spiritually for the better. And to this end, before we go further to look directly at how to recognize and develop patience rather than obstinacy, let's act preferentially and by taking the opportunity to settle ourselves for 20 minutes of meditation. If you would like to find a comfortable sitting position for yourself now as you listen to my guidance. So we close our eyes very gently, breathing deeply to ourselves for 2 or 3 breaths. Making sure our eyes are closed very gently. And we do what's known as a body scan, which means scanning down through the whole of our body, relaxing each and every muscle as we go. From our forehead, we relax any tension there. Our eyebrows and eyelids, we make sure are relaxed, and that the way we've closed our eyes is really only with our upper and lower eyelashes touching lightly together. We allow the muscles of our face to become soft, relaxing our jaw, taking care not to clench our teeth together. Moving on down, we relax our neck and let our shoulders drop to their natural height. Relaxing our arms, our forearms, and then our hands and fingers. So that even the way our hands rest in our lap is as light and gentle as possible. Moving on down, we relax all the muscles of our torso, chest, trunk, and abdomen. Relaxing both legs, all the way down to our feet and our toes, until we feel satisfied that no remaining part of our body has any sort of stress or tension anymore. There may be places in your body where tension still lingers, in which case you do your best to relax it as far as possible. And this allows us to forget about our body, turning our attention instead to the feeling inside us, that sense of warmth and well-being within, something which by any other name you could call your state of mind. Even our state of mind needs to be relaxed as far as possible. The way to relax it is to let go for a few moments of all the worries and concerns in your life, any regrets in your past, or any plans for the future, but remaining in the here and now, while conjuring up a sense of happiness and joy in your mind, as if happiness and joy were like tiny particles, growing and spreading within yourself, while chasing away any residual stresses and strains. And at a certain point when we feel comfortable within ourselves, we imagine our whole body to be nothing but an empty space or a hollow cavity, with no organs or tissues, muscles or bones. Alternately, you might imagine your body to be like a transparent bubble with nothing on the inside. But at this point you can remember back once again to the picture of the sun shining, or maybe a full moon, a star or a diamond, or perhaps an object you can feel rather than see. Conjure it up in your mind. The object may be clear to you, or it may be vague. For our purposes, it doesn't really matter. We allow that object to float slowly downwards within the space of our body until it comes gently to rest somewhere round about the area of our diaphragm at the deepest point of the breath. If our awareness wanders anywhere else, then we're going to bring it back to this point. If the inner object disappears, we can think of a new one. If the mind is quiet from thoughts, then we allow it to be that way. But if the thoughts are still numerous in the mind, then we can make use of that silent mantra, hearing the sound of the words Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang, coming up as if from the same point at the center of our diaphragm. The two things hand in hand, the inner object and the sound of the mantra, will gradually lead the mind deeper at the center, freeing the mind of unwanted thoughts to the point that nothing but a sense of stillness remains. Although technology has transformed our lives, which on the surface seems so beneficial, but sometimes lasting happiness is hard to find. No matter how fast technology progresses, but it never seems to be able to catch up with all the problems. We're left wondering whether there is more to life than technological prowess, whether what we have is really happiness, or is it just a postponement of further suffering. It's as if we've forgotten something. It's as if we've forgotten a point of balance within ourselves. We know we're after something, but we are not sure what we're looking for. We only know that if we find it, it would be blissful. And we suspect that meditation is something of what we've been missing, that it might provide answers for our quest. In fact, our natural birthright has given us a point of balance. Those who know how to keep this point of balance are unscathed by social pressure and can live a life of happiness. In society, we feel worn down by the onslaught of problems that seem to get in the way of our happiness. But there's no need for us to play the victim. Each of us has a potential in us to find a balance free from all these problems. But the power of our mind is still insufficient and leaves us vulnerable to stress and strain imposed on us. The power of the mind is concerned with everything we do 24 hours a day. And to perform any task successfully takes concentration, encouragement, memory, awareness, and understanding of those around us. But if our mind isn't trained, the happiness cannot stay with us for very long. Rain, drop by drop, splashes and scatters over the land. Each drop alone has no intrinsic value and soon disappears. In the same way, if the power of the untrained mind is scattered and divided by 1,000 personal complexities, it has no momentum and is vulnerable to unsatiated consumption, a lack of true friendship, and despair in the face of problems, the very things that are at the root of discontent in society. But what would happen if the power of the mind is withdrawn from 1,000 concerns into a single, unified focus? Like the rainwater, it comes together as rivulets and streams, gathering momentum and power until, as the torrent of a mighty river, it can generate enough power to fulfill our need for meaning in life. Suddenly we will realize that we have a new sense of intuition in understanding ourselves and have started the journey toward higher knowledge, exploring the frontier of inner space. Our knowledge of the world goes hand in hand with what we can see of the world. In the darkness of the night, where the sun's rays cannot penetrate, it is hard to discover or explore things beyond our understanding. In the same way, although our mind may be powerful, we cannot explore the mind that is still in darkness. But at the dawning of the day, when the sun illuminates the world for us to see, we can truly say we know the world. The rays of the sun are bright, but they cannot shed light into the inner world of the mind. The illumination we need to explore the mind is the light of the mind itself. Illumination that comes from the mind's natural point of balance at the center of the body. Illumination which arises from the power of the mind becomes focused in stillness at the center of the body. Because balance of mind brings brightness and the power of unification, it is the source of the knowledge and happiness which we need to keep up with the sophistication, the stresses and strains of the world around us. Meditation is a legacy passed down from the wisdom of the ancients. It harnesses the unification of nature in the power of our mind. the river's torrents, the brightness of the sun, and Earth's cool stillness. All you have to do is close your eyes, feel at ease, and bring the mind to a point of balance at the center of the body, as if you were returning to find the true nature of yourself with all the time in the world. So leave behind all tensions and concerns about the things of the world, finding a point of focus at the most peaceful point at the center of your body. Maintain your mind there, at the point of balance, whatever you are doing. Train your mind not to drift out of harmony with the center of your body, until the focus of your mind becomes more and more unified at the center of yourself, bright and clear, harnessing the natural brightness of the mind, which will let you glimpse at the unending happiness which comes from the balance, without succumbing to the thoughts of consumerism, suspicion, fragmentation, or problems, but leaving only benevolence and compassionate understanding. Meditation in stillness and unity brings together the natural brilliance of the mind at its point of balance. It gives rise to the penetrating knowledge to understand ourselves in relation to the root of problems in our society. Meditation alone or together, even for only 20 minutes a day, exploring and understanding yourself and the mind uncluttered by influences of the modern world, will bring you back into harmony and balance with nature. In the balance is a happiness which is beyond words and beyond doubt. And once we've seen the point of balance within ourselves, the happiness we have attained will spread to those around us in society, and eventually to the nation and the world. Those who meditate will recognize the fine balance of body and mind and its impact on society through a love of integrity and virtue. So meditation is our true legacy, passed down from ancient times, but never more relevant than in the present day. Through meditation, exploration of inner space will become more important than the exploration of outer space, a milestone on the road to a higher level of knowledge for humanity, the key to knowing our place in the universe, and our next great step forward. So now for a few moments in silence, we keep our mind focused gently at the center of ourself with the inner object of our choice, something we can see or something we can feel, each to our own practice now for a few more moments in silence, until we come to the appropriate time. it if your mind wanders away onto other things. Each time you realize, simply bring your attention back again to the center of the body as before, bringing it back for as many times as it takes to become established, to form a connection with the center in a way that you can actually feel the connection. If the thoughts return, do your best to ignore them. Make use of the mantra if ignoring them isn't working. And always double check to make sure you're using only the very lightest of touch in the way you apply your mind at the center. Sappa Buddhanupavena, Sappa Dhammanupavena, Sappa Sankhanupavena Sattha Soti Bhavantu Te. So if you'd like to come to the end of your meditation for today, you can gradually open your eyes again. If you feel at all uncomfortable, slowly try changing to a more comfortable position and gently finish your practice. So now we can recognize stubbornness and obstinacy. Let's look instead at its virtuous twin, in other words, patience, and how we can develop this, because it is key to overcoming all 16 of the subtle defilements in the mind that I summarized at the beginning of the session. A person who thinks to meditate and to get involved with spiritual transformation has to be quite a courageous person. In fact, the courage you're using when you come up against your shortcomings is the quality of patience. But it's not patience as you might understand it in the normal way we use it in everyday life. As we shall see, there are 5 levels of patience to be mastered, all the way from the equivalent of kindergarten level up to the level of grad school. Sometimes we have to have patience in the face of physical hardship, when the sun is too hot or the weather is too cold to go outside. But you still have to go outside anyway to cultivate good deeds. They are hardships caused by the environment around us, since nature gave us a sky over our heads and not a roof. So if it rains or if the sun is too hot, then we have to accept it and carry on with our work regardless. Normally, this sort of patience that comes immediately to mind when we hear the word patience or perseverance. But if we think about someone tough, like a soldier, then this is the sort of patience we associate with them. It means when a person grits their teeth and puts up with the situation until they can manage to achieve what they set out to do. In spite of the toughness required, patience in the face of hardship is regarded as only the most basic form of patience. It's like patience on the kindergarten level. Harder than patience in the face of physical hardship is patience in the face of pain and sickness. Some people can tolerate all sorts of hardship, but are scared to get an injection or will faint at the sight of their own blood. Doctors and nurses know that the seriousness of a patient's condition is often in inverse proportion to how much noise they make. A patient with a cut in their finger complains much more loudly than a patient who is paralyzed. When trying to develop patience in the face of pain or sickness, those experienced as hospital chaplains will often teach meditation to those who cannot overcome their pain, because it is the simplest way to deal with the suffering at its root. In some cases, the seriously sick are at an advantage compared to healthy people, because they find it very easy to let go of attachment to their body. It is ironic that people complain a lot about the pain of sitting still when they are meditating, but you never hear a single complaint when they're sitting in front of the TV all day, or worse still, sitting around a poker table all night. Patience in the face of suffering is thus considered the second most basic form of patience. It is the equivalent of patience at the elementary school level. Sometimes the hardship comes not as a result of our physical condition, but as a result of the dissonance in opinion or viewpoint between people forced to work together. The more people live in a family or a community together, the more occasions there will be for conflict. People have different habits, needs, and backgrounds, and if they don't have the capacity to be tolerant of others' differences, then arguments will soon break out. Even if you can put up with physical hardship, sickness, and pain, if you cannot smooth out conflict, then you will be hard pushed to succeed at anything that requires teamwork. If you're lucky enough to work alongside people who do have patience on this level, who can put aside their own personal differences to accommodate the needs of others, you will find everyone can pull together instead of each person pulling in a different direction. This will be a true example of people who have overcome stubbornness and obstinacy. The current management terminology for this, I believe, would be agility or flexibility. It's said that a person who can set aside individual differences in order to serve a cause larger than themselves is a person of considerable patience. This is why the number of people who achieve greatness as a team is much less than the number of people who achieve it individually. The patience to smooth out conflict is thus considered the third most basic form of patience. It is the equivalent of patience at the secondary school level. Sometimes hardship comes not as a result of our viewpoint, but as a result of having to say no to temptations of an addictive nature, or saying no to a bribe. If you see an injustice and someone offers to pay you hush money of $100 or $1,000, you might find it easy to insist on your principles, saying, "Who do you think I am, a mercenary?" But what if they then offer you $10,000 to keep your mouth shut? You might say, "Well, personally, I don't need your money, but sometimes I have to help out my employees and their families, but my self-respect is worth more than your money." But when they're offered 100 large, you find yourself clear out of witty comebacks and say, "I'll take it." As soon as you're put in a position of authority, there will be things to tempt you. The sort of patience that you need to overcome this sort of temptation is even more difficult to master than patience against unpleasant things. It's the same reason why it is so much harder not to smile at flattery than it is to keep your temper when insulted. Patience in the face of temptation is thus considered the fourth level of patience. It is like patience at the college level. Sometimes the hardship comes not as a result of our inability to resist temptations, but as our inability to face our shortcomings when they are pointed out to us. There was some research conducted on the importance of the ability to accept one's mistakes. Accepting mistakes was found to be the main sign of a successful student. Back in 2003, there was a sociologist called Charles L. Bosk at the University of Pennsylvania. who was studying students in a neurosurgery program to see what qualities separated the ones who really succeeded from the ones who failed. And from his research, he went on to write a book called Forgive and Remember: Managing Medical Failure. He found ultimately that 2 questions in his interviews pointed to the crucial difference. He'd asked the students, "Did you ever make mistakes? And if so, what was the worst mistake you ever made?" And bear in mind that a mistake in the operating theatre is usually a fairly serious mistake. Those who failed the program would inevitably answer that they rarely made mistakes, or else they would blame their mistakes on factors beyond their control. Have you ever done that? Well, those who succeeded in the program not only admitted to many mistakes, but also volunteered information on what they would do to not repeat those mistakes in the future. This sense of being ashamed or the sense of falling short when making a mistake is inextricably linked to our sincere intention to do better and the effort to succeed in doing better. It reframes every failure as a learning experience. Sometimes in Buddhism, it's known as the beginner's mind, to paraphrase Zen master Shunryu Suzuki. Useful for more than merely becoming a neurosurgeon, but also for spiritual transformation more generally. Overcoming stubbornness or obstinacy that impedes spiritual transformation requires that we engage with patience on the highest level, which is the patience to keep listening in the face of constructive criticism. Failure to develop it can be one of the most damaging obstacles you will come across on your journey of spiritual transformation. Some people can tolerate all forms of physical hardship, physical suffering, mental anguish, and temptation, but if anyone gives them a piece of advice, they will turn their back on their advisor. What I'm talking about here is constructive criticism, and within the culture of people who are trying to improve on themselves, who have the aim to become a better person in this short space of life available to us. So to be able to take criticism on board is really important. But yet, if we do get criticism, the tendency is to get hot around the collar or to find fault with the person who's criticizing us. It's not very often that if someone points out a person's shortcomings that you hear them say, "Oh, well, thank you very much. If you hadn't told me, then maybe no one would have told me. And if there happens to be anything more which you want to point out to me, then please don't hesitate to come back to me in the future." It's very rare that you hear that sort of thing. Much more common is someone finding fault with you, so you find fault back. That's not the sort of culture we're talking about, but one where people point out shortcomings in order that they can help one another to leverage improvement in life. I'd like to say that in Western culture, people are quite lucky that voicing criticism is generally not seen as a vindictive thing. But sometimes in Asia, that's not the case. In Asia, people don't like to voice criticism of other people because it's always seen as personal. It causes people to lose face. In the West, it's not such a big deal. People can criticize one another and then you just forget about it. Whereas if you're in China, then maybe they're going to remember that for the next 7 generations and you're going to get you back for it. So this is one advantage the West has, even though within the context of Buddhism and meditation, criticism is seen to be a good thing, but somehow in Asia it has been sidelined instead of being seen as a valuable opportunity for overcoming personal shortcomings. Patience in the face of criticism is thus said to be the 5th level of patience. It's like patience at the postgrad level. So if we are not already patient by nature, are there ways we can improve on our levels of patience on all 5 levels that I've described? Well, fortunately, there are at least 6 ways to make sure that we become more patient rather than more obstinate. The first way is to be more reflective when you are put in situations of hardship which require patience. It can mean bolstering our sense of conscience, not to give in to temptation, and ask ourselves whether we need to engage with a deeper sense of gratitude or duty in order to achieve this. Secondly, To develop patience, we need to practice meditation more regularly. Meditation is the foundation of all sorts of patience. Patience allows our meditation to deepen, and as our meditation deepens, our ability to be patient is improved. In fact, for all forms of self-cultivation, our left hand is always patience and the right hand is always meditation. If one hand is dirty, we must use the other to clean it. If both hands are dirty, then we rub our two hands together. This is why no matter what part of spiritual transformation you want to study, you have to meditate first in order to prepare the mind. Thirdly, especially in the face of provocation, try turning a blind eye, listening selectively, being humble and steadfast. In fact, the great abbot of Wat Pak Nam, the founder of our Dhammakaya tradition, advised that we can avoid impatience by keeping our distance from the sort of people who provoke us. We would avoid listening to gossip. We should avoid looking down on even the humblest of tasks. And finally, wherever possible, we should avoid letting our mind be perturbed by the ups and downs of the roller coaster of life. If you can follow these 4 practices, you will soon be able to cultivate patience and other virtues will follow. Fourthly, remind yourself how much worse it could be, or conversely, count your blessings, to bring to mind aspects of your life where you are still much luckier than other people. If you sit for meditation and find it's not going as well as you expected, don't give up. Think instead, today all I can see in meditation is pitch darkness. Well, at least that's better than feeling dizzy. And if some days you sit for meditation and you feel dizzy, well, think instead, today I feel dizzy in meditation. Well, at least it's better than feeling aches and pains. And if some days you sit for meditation and you feel aches and pains, well, think instead, today I feel aches and pains in meditation. Well, at least that's better than having a headache. And if some days you sit for meditation and you have a headache, think instead, today I have a headache when meditating. Well, at least that's better than having a fever. But in any case, whatever may happen to you, it's better than being dead. Fifthly, remind yourself that the darkest of night comes before the dawn, and it will help you accept tough conditions as transitory. And last, train yourself to be a person who is not full of excuses, the sort of person who is not prone to ifs and buts or answering back. So, in conclusion, those who appear weak on the outside, for example, humble and compliant and never complaining or making a fuss, may in fact be hiding within themselves an uncompromising and determined wish to develop themselves. What you realize is that being a strong person on the outside, being the macho tough guy, but being weak on the inside isn't going to help you very much in the context of spiritual transformation. Instead, you should aim to be a person who appears vulnerable on the outside, but who is tough on the inside. This tends to be the stereotype of a person who is more involved in spiritual transformation. I don't mean that you're gullible or obsequious, but you need to be the sort of person who is of an approachable disposition, who is willing to take on board things from anyone who might have the generosity to share knowledge with you. But on the inside, you would be strong, because although you may not look like a person who has a lot of airs and graces, but on the inside, you have the courage to face up to the shortcomings in yourself, and you're prepared to face up to who you really are, and to do something about it, which is more than many people who look like tough on the outside, but they have nothing to show for their inner practice. So when push comes to shove, then as a person with inner strength, you have more to draw upon, more caliber, than a person who has merely developed their image or appearances the whole of their life. In conclusion, in the sessions extending back to session A23, we've had the chance to look at the structure of the mind and the way the defilements or sicknesses of the mind can take their action at different points in the thought process. We have seen that the further and deeper a thought goes in the process, the more difficult it is to exercise patience against the action of such defilements. The most painful defilements are the ones that affect the deepest level of function in our psyche, such as the powers of our own discretion, of which we are so proud. As we've seen today, the most difficult aspect of patience is to keep alive our wish to change for the better without slipping into the coziness of obstinacy or stubbornness. If you are to remember nothing else from the 15 most recent sessions from me, then at least try to remember the value of patience, and that patience is not a passive virtue but a dynamic one that can be applied therapeutically on all levels of our psyche. There are lots of things which I could talk about which are just academically interesting. They're good to know, but they may not actually change anything in yourself, which you could improve upon. The topics I've chosen in these latter sessions, whichever ones you've been listening to, will help you to see emotional strengths and weaknesses in yourself or in others, and hopefully, if you can remember all you've learned, you will see it's possible to wriggle free of some of those shortcomings. But however you stand in relation to emotional shortcomings you have discovered, you will certainly need patience in order to overcome them. So let me finish up with a quick mention about temple support and a news update about the availability of meditation teaching in English. For those of you who like to visit the temple in Azusa to bring offerings, please be informed that despite being downgraded to the red tier in LA County, we are still using the new site for temple offerings in the parking lot next to the main temple building between 10 and 11 a.m. each day. If you have trouble with the passcode on the gate or wish to visit at a different time, then please call Jenny on 562-716-2961. There'll be a monk on standby in PPE to receive the offering and give a short blessing for visitors. English-speaking monks will be on duty on Wednesdays and Saturdays, and a short ceremony for 5 precepts, meditation, and a blessing are given on weekends starting from 10:45 a.m. Needless to say, the whole temple would like to rejoice in the merits of all continuing to take the opportunity to support the temple in this way. Meditation is particularly valuable in this COVID era to help us cope with the extended lockdown. And in this respect, here at the temple, although there are still no face-to-face teaching sessions for the interim, you can access Dhamma teachings in English at the YouTube channel called Peace Point Meditation or the Facebook page of Peace Point Meditation. For aficionados of Zoom meetings, another way you can access Peace Point content is to join the Zoom meeting ID 926-2908-8736 with the passcode 072. But bear in mind, there is no way to pause or replay the media on Zoom for those of you trying to take notes. For those of you who've been following my talks, you may be interested to subscribe to a YouTube channel, which I have recently set up in my own name, which can be found by searching for Phra Nicholas Thanissaro on YouTube, where I have uploaded more than 100 clips of meditations, Dhamma talks, funeral talks, talks for children, and so forth. Meanwhile, there are a few further changes to the 2021 schedule from Peace Point. Every Sunday morning, you have now got me with live material and archive material on alternating Sundays. Venerable Sopon now appears every Thursday evening. Meanwhile, Peace Breaks from Peace Point are broadcast every Tuesday, not Monday now, Tuesday, and Wednesday evenings between 7 and 7:30 p.m. There's a silent meditation broadcast each Friday between 7 and 8 p.m. For the benefit of families listening in, there is also a special show for children in English known as Shining Stars that goes out between 7:30 and 8 p.m. every Monday evening with bedtime stories and meditation short enough to keep the attention of younger listeners. Outside of the live streams and on-demand programming, there is also the newly updated MindGem app, which you can download for free, allowing you to listen to meditation and Dhamma talks in English on your cell phone, even when you are offline. So this session, we have looked at the topic of obstinacy and patience. For my next live session online with you, which will, fingers crossed, be a week on Sunday morning, we'll be moving on to look at something along the lines of Buddhist concepts. For good measure, I would like to remind viewers that even better than posting thank you or great talk or sadhu in the broadcast comments, you can email your questions about meditation or what you have heard in the lecture to the email address as you can see spelled out on the slide. And I'll do my best to answer these on my next session. In the meantime, try to stay healthy, avoid recklessness or complacency in the face of the virus, maintain a positive mood, speak only positive words, forgive others, extend good wishes to others, and meditate daily. Also, may you be able to apply the advice I've given you today to truly break free from stubbornness and obstinacy once and for all, and also to master patience and perseverance on all 5 levels. So for today, this is me, Phra Nicholas Thanissaro, signing off for this session. So long, folks, and stay safe.